Hi, my name is Sam and welcome to Cars Performance Garage. On today's video, I'm going to be working on my project WRX track car and hopefully get everything planned, organize all the parts that I do need, and so I can finish it off a lot faster and a lot more efficient. So to start off today, I have got a Word document up with some tables, and basically I'm going to go through all the car, all the things that I need to do to it yet. I'm going to record what parts I need for it, and I'm going to double check what parts I've got, what I don't have, so I can then order it and it'll come as soon as possible. So I've got quite a big list of things that need to be done. I've got a list of those items plus then the parts that are needed for those items. I just did a quick check of the parts that I have. I did give the parts a huge clear out as I noticed that I had so many excess parts I didn't need. So luckily the parts that I did need, I actually had them spare myself. So I've now got it all together. I'm going to print off this sheet so I can go through and start chipping off items on the list. All right, here we are. So I've got all the tasks, all the items needed. As I come along, I can write some more down. And if there's any parts I am missing, I can put them in there. So I'm going to start going through this list and chip off the easiest stuff first. And once all that stuff's done, I will tackle the harder stuff. First thing on the list was to route and connect all the wiring on the turbo side. So I connected all 3 plugs. Next, it was on to installing the coolant expansion tank or the overflow tank, whatever you like to call it. I was going to go with the WRX tank, but unfortunately, due to financial constraints, I decided to go with OEM, and I'll probably upgrade in the future once the OEM one springs a leak. I had the manifold prepared for the WRX expansion tank, so I needed to reassemble all the bits that I took off, which included the cover for the injectors and the 2 bolts that hold the TGVs to the block. Once that was done, I just quickly installed the turbo coolant feed hose. Next thing I did was I filled up the power steering reservoir and I primed the system. When you put a Subaru power steering pump that does not have any fluid in it already, I highly recommend you put some fluid in the reservoir, spin the pump by hand first before you actually turn the car on. The reasons why you want to do this is A, to prevent any damage to the pump, and B, often that very first bit of fluid that gets sucked, because there is a lot of air still in the system, the fluid gets mixed with the air and becomes aerated, and so when you're trying to bleed the power steering system, if your fluid's aerated, it will be impossible to bleed. Doing this is just a good little preemptive measure to ensure you don't have any problems further down the track. Because I had to take the belts off anyway, I quickly checked them to make sure they were tight. The way I personally like to check to see if the belts are tight enough is to grab the longest section between pulleys of the belt and give it some moderate pressure and try to twist it. Using that moderate pressure, the goal is to be able to twist it to about 90 degrees, no further and no less. So if you can twist the belt further than 90 degrees, it needs to be tightened, but if you can't twist it 90 degrees, then the belt's too tight and you need to loosen it a little bit. It's not an exact science, but over time you do get a good feel for how tight they should be, and just doing this test gives you a good little baseline. Once that was all done, I decided to start installing the airbox. Because I resprayed the engine bay, it meant that all the bolt holes got covered in paint, so I had to go through and chase them all with a tap. But Installing the airbox, I came across one bolt hole that I forgot to chase. So after quickly getting the tap and die set out and chasing that thread, I could then continue installing the airbox. I decided to keep the stock airbox because I will max out my engine block before I actually max out the airbox, so there's no point upgrading it yet. The most difficult part of installing the airbox is cutting down the piece that goes from the inlet to the airbox to the right size. The way I like to cut bigger hose sizes to length is by getting a hose clamp, putting it over the hose, and then lining it up with your markings from test fitting, making sure it is squared. Then I like to always get a brand new fresh blade on my knife and then cut around using the hose clamp as a guide. It's good just to give it a little score first and then do a second cut that's deeper that goes the whole way through. To make the install look a little bit more professional, after you've cut the piece off, I recommend getting some sort of flame source to burn off all of the excess little material that doesn't get cut cleanly. Personally, I reckon this is the hardest hose to cut properly to length, so it takes a lot of trial and error. And as you can see by the amount of times that I go back to the bench and cut it, it took me a lot of trial and error. Once that was done, I got the vapor hose from the Impreza and installed it onto the WRX. I tried to install this in a previous video, there's a card to that video on the screen now, but in summary, I destroyed the one that came on the WRX. I was not able to replace it with an aftermarket option. Buying a brand new OEM one was surprisingly expensive and also was going to take a long time to arrive, so using the one off the Impreza became the best option. Next on the list was the radiator hoses. 90% of the time, aftermarket radiator hoses will not fit on your car without doing some trimming. If you don't cut them properly to size, what can happen is the hose can expand and rub on the pulley. Because the pulley's traveling fast, it will cut in the hose, and eventually that hose could burst and it would be a really bad day. A little rule of thumb that I like to use in terms of clearance for the rad hoses is if I get my index finger, I should be able to fit my index finger in between the hose and the pulley. If it's any closer, then it will need to be retrimmed. And funnily enough, while I was filming the B-roll for this shot, I found that it needs some more trimming. To access the bottom hose, I needed to jack the car up, and I went through and marked up roughly how much I need to cut off. It's good to be a little conservative with marking and measuring the lengths you got to cut off, because you can always cut more off, but you can't add more on. I've connected the bottom radiator hose. I just had to trim it a little bit, not too much, but now it's fitting pretty good. So I can now tackle all the stuff on top and get all that sorted. So there was some sealant on this little barb, but it's not really doing anything anymore. So I'll get some more sealant, seal it up, and then we can finally connect the rest of the rad hoses. I decided to use a liquid sealant because there's not that much thread on the end of that barb. So if I was to put Teflon tape on it, it would not be as effective as a liquid sealant. To help get the hose on the barb, I've just boiled some water and left the hose in there. So that should help it expand a little bit and be a bit more flexible, so I can finally put it onto that barb. Unfortunately, the expansion tank sits in a really awkward spot. It's actually hitting the timing cover. So I'm eventually just going to get a new one, but for the meantime, I've got this hose here that will work just fine. I didn't end up using that hose to put into the expansion tank just because it was a really awkward angle, so I just got the stock one. Considering it's going to get replaced anyway, it will do just fine for the meantime. One thing that I did notice when I was taking everything out of the bay was there is a ground wire down there that obviously was cut off. And I reckon it was cut off because when it had the impact, they just didn't take any notice, but it was disconnected. So I've got a ground off the NA wiring loom, so I can just splice it in and hook it all up. Even though the car still ran fine without it, at least having this extra ground is just that little bit of assurance. Plus, it's like 5 minutes to do, so I might as well. Alright, so what I thought was going to be 5 minutes is going to take a bit longer, as I need to take the headlight out, as there's just not enough room in there to access it. So, at least like everything's kind of half on, so it won't even take that long to remove the headlight. So let's remove the bumper, the headlight, and get it all sorted. One thing that I do to all of my Hawkeyes and a lot of my mates' Hawkeyes is I like to replace the top plastic clips with bolts. I do this by drilling out the holes a little bit, installing some M6 riv nuts, then I use these flat little M6 dress up bolts with a washer, and with them installed, it means I will never have to deal with broken bumper clips ever again. Alright, so to make this joint, I'm going to use an open barrel crimp, glue lined heat shrink, and then just a open barrel crimp tools. I went off on quite the tangent in this video, so I'll just sum up why I prefer to crimp than solder. The main reason why I prefer to crimp than solder is soldering produces a stiff point in the wire. If that solder joint is not supported correctly by using the proper heat shrink or some wrap, then what can happen is over time, bending, movement and vibrations can cause that solder joint to fail. Another main reason why I prefer to crimp is because crimping is way faster and requires less tools. There's a lot of internet debate regarding what's better, soldering or crimping, but as the reasons mentioned, that's why I prefer crimping to soldering. Alright, unfortunately right when I was in the middle of crimping that, the camera ran out of battery, but it's all crimped now, so we can do a quick pull test. Nice and strong. That is exactly why I like to use crimps, because I find that they're really strong. To finish up this crimp, all I needed to do was to heat up the heat shrink so it could contract and protect that fresh joint. Now the ground's ready to install, but before I install it, I'm just going to quickly clean the surface of the ring terminal and grind off the paint where this ground mounts to. With it all clean, I can be confident that I'll get a good connection with that ground. And to finish up this video, I just reinstalled the headlight and the front bumper, and I was done for the night. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please consider giving it a like, and if you like my content, please hit the subscribe button down below. If you have any video ideas, suggestions or feedback, please leave it in the comments section, and as always, you can follow me on Instagram at 07carbs. Thanks again for watching my video, and until next time, keep on learning.